Happy Sunday, everybody. Greetings from a hotel room in Chicago. My goal for the week is to not get shot. I will consider my trip a success if I return home unharmed. Was planning on doing a different musing today, so I'll do that one next week. When on Thursday, the church came out and announced a new update to the honor code and to the dress and grooming standards at all of the church universities. So this was just a few days ago, and I've seen some chatter about it online, certainly centered around this idea of shorts. A lot of chatter about the LGBT stuff, which I'll mention in a moment. But I haven't really seen anyone breaking down the before and after, kind of like I did in the musing on the new For the Strength of Youth pamphlets, and kind of looking at the updates through the lens of what was there. So my task today is to highlight a little bit of the before to better understand the after and contrast what was changed on BYU campuses, these church-owned universities, for good, for bad, for whatever, just highlighting some of the updates that were made. The church, when announcing these changes, said that there were three reasons why they made the changes. At a high level, they said it was to help students draw closer to Jesus Christ and strengthen the overall student experience. But then they specifically said that these changes would accomplish three things. Number one, they were adopting a principle-based approach while retaining a set of common expectations. So you'll see that in a moment when we talk about the shorts issue. Number two, simplify and unify dress and grooming principles and expectations across CES campuses. So creating a single standard. Again, we'll talk about that. And number three, better align the ecclesiastical endorsement interview with the ecclesiastical responsibilities of church leaders. So those were the three purposes or background behind why these changes were being made. I'm not going to touch on the ecclesiastical interview. There were some little tweaks here and there, but I'm going to focus on the dress and grooming and the honor code. I've seen some criticism, actually, of the ecclesiastical endorsement from folks who attend BYU but don't believe the gospel, and they don't like that the ecclesiastical endorsement is kind of a mini temple recommend interview now, where they have to, state that they have, faith in God and sustain the president of the church and all those things. So I have seen some pushback to some of those changes, but I'm only today going to focus on the dress and grooming standards and the honor code updates. Now, what's interesting is in the dress and grooming section, I thought that there would be something different here, because reading the introduction section, it talked about adopting a principle-based approach. So I thought, okay, hey, this is going to go in the direction of the For the Strength of Youth. If teenagers are able to have a higher level of here's the principles, right? Instead of no rated R movies and, no doing X and no doing Y and so forth. For the Strength of Youth now is just a set of principles. Like, hey, it's important to only consume media that will edify you, and, these types of things. And so I thought, hey, that's what they're going to do with even older kids who are attending BYU, is they're going to adopt, like they said, a principle-based approach. So then you get into the dress and grooming standards. And it begins with a set of principles. It breaks it down into principles and then expectations. So starting with the principles, what are the dress and grooming principles? Again, they said that they were going to adopt a principle-based approach. They said that every student, employee, and volunteer commits to do four things. Number one, represent the Savior Jesus Christ, the church, and the church educational system. Number two, preserve an inspiring environment without distraction or disruption, where covenants are kept in a spirit of unity so the Holy Ghost can teach truth. Number three, promote modesty, cleanliness, neatness, and restraint in dress and grooming. And number four, maintain an elevated standard distinctive to educational institutions of the Church of Jesus Christ. So then they say, prefacing their expectations section, they said that the dress and grooming expectations in the examples below should align with these principles. However, application of these principles is not limited to the expectations listed. Members of the university community are expected to apply these principles to dress and grooming questions as they arise. Okay, so there's our list of principles. They said they were going to adopt a principle-based approach. And their principles are, you're representing God and his church. We want an inspiring environment. We should be modest, clean, and neat. And we want to maintain an elevated standard. So then we get into the expectations, and that's where I think things start to break down. Because my expectations of what I would be reading when I first read this was, hey, they're moving in the direction of For the Strength of Youth. They're not going to micromanage the specific, nit-picky dress and grooming standards that, some people like and are not immodest or unclean and so forth. And my expectations were not met because the expectations continue to have a kind of nitpicky approach. I'm going to share, I'm going to mention what BYU Provo had, and then what BYU-Idaho had. I'm going to leave out Ensign College, formerly known as the LDS Business College, and BYU Hawaii. I'm just going to focus on BYU Utah or Provo, BYU Idaho, and then I'll share with you what the new changes are to contrast with the old stuff. So first I'm going to focus on dress, and then I'll talk grooming. All right. So starting with dress in BYU Provo, they used to say, they broke it apart for men and for women. Both BYUs did. So BYU Provo said, for men, a clean and well cared for appearance should be maintained. Clothing is inappropriate when it is sleeveless, revealing, or form-fitting. Shorts must be knee length or longer. For women, they said, a clean and well cared for appearance should be maintained. Clothing is inappropriate when it's sleeveless, strapless, backless, or revealing, has slits above the knee, or is form-fitting. Dresses, skirts, and shorts must be knee length or longer. So a little bit more detail there for the women than for the men as it pertains to dress, and very specific. Again, this is the old version in Provo. I don't want anyone who's newly, coming on to the live stream to be like, that sounds like the old one. That is the old one. That's BYU Provo. Now I'll do BYU Idaho, and then we'll talk about the new one. So BYU Idaho, they start with a section that applies both to men and women, and then they break it out. So for everybody, they say, immodest clothing is any clothing that is tight, sheer, or revealing in any manner. Men and women should be neat and clean and avoid being extreme or inappropriately casual in clothing, hairstyle, and behavior. Pants, slacks, or jeans should not be patched, faded, frayed, or torn, and must be ankle length. And that's where we get the no shorts rule from BYU Idaho. Must be ankle length. Caps or hats should not be worn in buildings. Shoes should be worn in all public campus areas. Flip-flops and other casual footwear are inappropriate on campus. Shorts are not appropriate campus attire. So not only did they say that it has to be ankle length, they then called it out specifically and said shorts are not appropriate campus attire. So then for women, they add that clothing is immodest when it is sleeveless, does not cover the stomach, or is low cut in the front or back. Dresses and skirts should be knee length or longer, even with leggings worn. No capris may be worn on campus. For men, there's nothing else. They don't single out men. Just whatever was in the combined section at the top is what applies to the men. So again, a little bit more emphasis for the women when it comes to dress. All right, now the new standardized expectations for dress for students, employees, and volunteers at all the church universities are combined into men and women. They no longer have a sex-specific language that addresses any particular gender. They say instead, dress for men and women should, two things. Number one, be modest in fit and style. Dressing in a way that would cover the temple garment is a good guideline, whether or not one has been endowed. Accommodation may be made for athletic participation. Number 2, dress for women and men should be neat and clean. Sloppy, overly casual, ragged, or extreme clothing is not acceptable. Period. The end. So that's a lot better in a lot of ways, though that does have a more simplified approach. You might call it a more principle-based approach, more guidelines, right? Here they're saying that dressing in a way that would cover the temple garment is a good guideline, whether you've been endowed or not, rather than you must, wear shorts to the knee length. You may not have a slit above the knee. They're trying to establish the principle, a garment-oriented principle. And okay, they say it's a good guideline. That doesn't mean it's a hard and fast rule. Now, granted, a lot of this comes down to the details, the enforcement. You get some hardline honor code officer, you get some snitch who, rats you out to the office and, Bob's your uncle. So it kind of depends on how enforcement happens, but the wording here I consider better. So you're like, well, wait a minute, you said my expectations were not met. Well, stay tuned. So be modest and fit in fit and style, great, and be neat and clean. That's really the encapsulation for dress now. Be neat, be clean, be modest. Fine, that's great. Now, the challenge is, without being more prescriptive, right, it's left up to the interpretation and enforcement of people who are in a position of having interpreted and enforced all the past stuff for decades. A lot of these people have worked for, BYU or the Honor Code Office for a long time. It's very hard to get those people to, change. If they see a girl with capri pants at BYU-Idaho, or if they see, someone with faded jeans or frayed jeans, right? Some might have the temptation to say, hey, I don't think that's neat and clean. So these words, neat, clean, modest, shouldn't be overly casual or extreme. Like, how do you define what that means? Because some 60-year-old honor code agent is going to interpret that differently than a 20-something-year-old responding to current fashion trends or personal preference. So there's good and bad here in going to a more generic, principle-based, guideline-based approach. However, there is a danger, I think, in abstracting it and empowering people to interpret that however they please. You can see there's a reason why in the past honor code descriptions, they were very specific. They had some girl at BYU-Idaho wear leggings under a short skirt. So then they came in and said, dresses and skirts should be knee length or longer, even with leggings worn. I mean, obviously that wasn't in there from a century ago. They put that in there in response to something happening that somebody didn't like. So then they made it even more explicit and they had to be more clear. But that clarity is helpful, at least, even if it's silly or stupid. It's at least helpful in interpretation and enforcement. The jury is out on what it will actually look like in the years ahead on BYU campus with these more broad guidelines that are subject to interpretation. What does it mean to be modest or overly casual or extreme? All right, let's go to grooming. I'm going to follow the same pattern. I'm going to share BYU Provo first, then BYU-Idaho, and then we'll talk about the new standards for grooming. So for BYU Provo, again, they would break it out by men and women. So they first said for men, hairstyles should be clean and neat, avoiding extreme styles or colors, and trimmed above the collar, leaving the ear uncovered. Sideburns should not extend below the earlobe or onto the cheek. If worn, mustaches should be neatly trimmed and may not extend beyond or below the corners of the mouth. Men are expected to be clean-shaven. Beards are not acceptable. Earrings and other body piercing are not acceptable. Shoes should be worn in all public campus areas. So that's the men. Then for the women, hairstyles should be clean and neat, avoiding extremes in styles or colors. Excessive ear piercing, more than one per ear, because of President Hinckley, and all other body piercing are not acceptable. Shoes should be worn in all public campus areas. All right, so there's your grooming. I guess shoes could be lumped under dress. They didn't break it out. I kind of, at least BYU-Idaho, I think I had to break apart because they lumped dress and grooming all together. Okay, so now let's go to BYU-Idaho. Again, they first address both men and women. They say that hairstyles should be clean and neat, avoiding extreme styles and unnatural colors. Do not disfigure yourself with tattoos or body piercings. And then they go to the women and the men. For the women, they say women may wear one pair of earrings, period. That's the only women-specific grooming restrictions or guidelines that they have. For men, they have much more. They say hairstyles should be clean and neat, avoiding extreme styles or colors, and trimmed above the collar, leaving the ear uncovered. Sideburns should not extend below the earlobe or onto the cheek. Men are expected to be clean-shaven. Mustaches, if worn, should be neatly trimmed and may not extend beyond or below the corners of the mouth. Beards are not appropriate. Earrings are not acceptable. You can see a lot of mirrored language between the two universities. Okay, that is BYU Provo and Idaho. What does it say now? The new grooming standards for all church universities. Again, two things. Number one, hair should be clean, neat, modest, and avoid extremes in styles and colors. Again, this is men and women, so they're responding to both, to all students here. So clean, neat, modest, avoid extremes in styles and colors. That's number one. Number two, for grooming, they say men's hair should be neatly trimmed. Men should be clean shaven. If worn, mustaches should be neatly trimmed. So this is a male-specific grooming instruction that they still retained. And here's where my expectations were dashed, because I'm thinking, principles, right? Modesty, cleanliness. Let's not micromanage the saints. Let's not cling to decades-old stereotypes about hippies and the like, which is why Wilkinson and these others at BYU started, enforcing against beards and sideburns and all these things. They're rising above that. It's a new day. Principles are governing rather than all this micromanaged minutia. And in many respects, that's true, because again, what I just read is like a sixth of the text that you have in these other, existing grooming standards. So it's shorter, it's simple, it's focused, it's again generalized, right? Some principles here, and yet they still say men should be clean shaven. They only allow mustaches. Why in the world can people not have a neatly trimmed beard? There is nothing about a beard that is unclean or unneat or immodest or anything. This is such a legacy holdover and a missed opportunity. Really, it creates a distraction, because rather than applauding this general trend towards, the more for the strength of youth, principle-based approach, instead now I'm here talking about how they screwed the pooch and kept banning beards. And, I wish I could fully applaud this move. There are things to praise. There are things I like. And I've been saying that throughout this musing. But it's just a facepalm that here you had councils and committees and all these people looking over the honor code and the dress and grooming, and they were debating, this word and that comma and let's strike that out. And like, you can imagine how these meetings went, right? And in all of that kerfuffle, there was someone in the room with high-ranking authority, no doubt, that said, nope, we need to keep the ban on beards. It's odd to me, right? Because why? The principles. Let's go back to the principles. Every student, employee, or volunteer commits to represent the Savior, the church educational system. You can do that with a beard. You can go to the temple with a beard. You can be the president of the church and hold all the keys to the kingdom and have a beard. Recent ones haven't, but plenty have. So nothing about a beard means that you can't represent the Savior or the church educational system. So cross out that one. Number two, preserve an inspiring environment without distraction or disruption, where covenants are kept in a spirit of unity, so the Holy Ghost can teach truth. You can have an inspiring environment if your classmate has a beard. There's nothing about that that's a distraction or a disruption. So number two is out. Number three, promote modesty, cleanliness, neatness, and restraint in dress and grooming. You can have crazy beards. You can, so you can say it has to be a, tightly groomed beard and so forth. You can't have a Lorenzo Snow or Brigham Young level beard. There's ways to address, the unneat aspects of having a beard, for sure. But to ban them in general, to say that anyone with a beard is immodest or unclean or unneat or unrestrained in dress and grooming is simply not true on its face. So number 3 is out, which leaves us with principle number 4. As a reminder, principle number 4 says that every student, every employee, every volunteer commits to maintain an elevated standard distinctive to educational institutions of the Church of Jesus Christ. Bingo. I look at number 4 and I say, that is why someone's on these committees and councils and everyone wordsmithing all of this stuff said, oh no, making sure that men are clean shaven is part of maintaining not a standard, not a unique standard, not a different standard, not a customized standard, none of these things. No, they said maintain an elevated standard. They're claiming that a restriction like this, to say that men cannot have beards, that is an elevated standard, elevating above other standards. So if you can go to the temple with a beard, I just got my temple recommend renewed like 2 weeks ago, right? At no point did the bishop or the stake presidency counselor ever ask about or care about my beard. It's not a contingency on my righteousness or qualifications or faith or anything. So we have this elevated standard for the temple, right? God's house. And is the church educational system trying to say that their standard is elevated above that? Maybe they're trying to say that it's elevated above other universities. I can see that, right? Oh, you can go to the University of Utah and have a beard and be a communist and wear sandals and all the things, right? But here at BYU, we have an elevated standard compared to other universities. So now I'm sidestepping, right? I'm like, okay, I don't love that they're saying it's an elevated standard in a theological sense because they're a church. They're saying that you're representing God and the church educational system. It stands to reason that elevated standard has some implication to other standards we have as church members, including the temple. So I think that's silly that they said that. But now I'm sidestepping to say, okay, maybe what they meant to say was, or what they're implying is elevated standard compared to other universities, compared to other educational institutions. Like, fine, right? Maybe, I think the ecclesiastical endorsement aspect and just the general guidelines would be sufficient to have an elevated standard compared to other universities. Do we really need to be the university for a while it was the university that wouldn't allow caffeinated drinks. Now it's just the university that doesn't allow beards. How is that an elevated standard worth any type of recognition or attention? It's the Lord, what is it? The man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Let's elevate the standard of our righteousness and our faith and our curiosity and our academic proficiency and our inquiry, into new ideas. Let's elevate the standard on the things that matter, the things of the heart and the mind. But instead, we're so trapped in this man looketh on the outward appearance, this beard issue. And yes, I have a beard. I didn't care when I went to BYU. I couldn't really grow one too well back then. But so sure, Connor's biased. He has a beard. He's hung up on this issue. Whatever. To me, I don't care about the beard. To me, it's we got so close to having a principle-based guideline approach for the church's university, and yet we're still stuck in this natural man type of approach to regulating the appearance and behavior of others. Okay, so then they have this Q&A, this frequently asked questions. I'm just going to pick 2 out. One of the questions was, are there specific changes in dress and grooming now? Their answer is yes. For example, students on each campus will be allowed to wear shorts. Congrats to all you kids up in Idaho. Provided those shorts are in keeping with the principles and expectations given. They can't be, extreme, or what were the other words? Immodest or unclean. As noted above, dress and grooming decisions should align with the dress and grooming principles and expectations. And application of these principles is not limited to the expectations listed, meaning we're going to get other funny interpretations and enforcement in the future because this is not an exhaustive list, as they themselves say. We are striving to create a culture that is consistent with the distinct religious purpose of CES institutions. So here they're stating the reason for which they do all of this. We want to create a culture consistent with the distinct religious purpose. And in many respects, they've improved that. Again, the devil's in the details. We'll see how the enforcement plays out and how things actually change, other than Idaho kids all of a sudden wearing shorts and flip-flops, because they didn't say shoes only, but they did go after overly casual dress. So maybe they're going to interpret flip-flops as overly casual. But they're saying here that the purpose is to create a culture consistent with the distinct religious purpose of CES institutions. And having a beard has nothing to do with that, unless they're creating a culture of beardless men for some silly reason. It's so bizarre. So then they ask this question and then answer it. What is meant by men's hair being neatly trimmed? As stated in the dress and grooming expectations, they explain, hair should be neat, modest, and avoid extremes. The intent of this standard for men is that hair should be cut short and neatly trimmed. So not only can you not have a beard, you can't have, as a man, longer hair, because they claim that is neat to have short hair. So they're really saying no long hair. They're saying be like Jesus in every way other than his appearance. Like, if people started wearing robes, are they going to ban robes too? Just, I don't know, it's silly. Okay, let's move past dress and grooming. I'm going to focus now on the honor code. Maybe on another musing I will share the experience, the run-in that I had with the honor code office while attending BYU. I'll save that for another day, because that will take a while and will be fun to relive. For now, reviewing the honor code, I'm again going to read through the old version for the church educational system, and then I will talk about the new version. A lot of it is the same, but I'm going to identify for you the differences of what's in the honor code. Okay, so the old version. Number 1, be honest. Number 2, live a chaste and virtuous life, including abstaining from any sexual relations outside of marriage between a man and a woman. Number 3, respect others, including the avoidance of profane and vulgar language. Number 4, obey the law and follow campus policies. Number 5, abstain from alcoholic beverages, tobacco, tea, coffee, vaping, and substance abuse. Number 6, participate regularly in church services, required only of church members. Number 7, observe Brigham Young University's dress and grooming standards. And finally, number 8, encourage others in their commitment to comply with the honor code. All right, so we've got 8 items in the honor code of old. And now I'm going to, again, a lot of them are the same. I'm just going to highlight some of the differences. The first difference at the top of the list is that they have a new provision in the honor code which says that students are required to maintain an ecclesiastical endorsement, including striving to deepen faith and maintain gospel standards. They have a question on the website about what does it mean to strive, and because then you got all these kids who are like, oh, I don't know if I believe these things, but I still want to go to BYU. But they're saying you have to maintain the ecclesiastical endorsement, and then you have to be basically committed to the gospel path. So that's now at the top of the list. They have the same honesty thing. They have the same live a chaste and virtuous life, no sexual relations outside of marriage stuff. But then they add this provision saying that living a chaste and virtuous life also includes abstaining from same-sex romantic behavior. So you've got, some gay kids at BYU who are holding hands or, cuddling on the quad, or smooching or whatever. And so they're making clear here that any type of same-sex relations are in conflict with the honor code. So I've seen some from the LGBTQIA plus 2SL blah, 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 blah community being grumpy about this online. So then they say they had this provision that was there before, abstain from alcoholic beverages, tobacco, tea, coffee, vaping. And then they add marijuana. They threw marijuana in there. And then instead of and substance abuse, they now say and other substance abuse. What's also interesting about this is they moved it up, by 2. They moved it up the list. I got to assume that this list is in order of some kind of priority or emphasis, because they reordered some of them, making clear to me, I think, that they're trying to perhaps give more focus and attention to some over others. This one got bumped up too. Then they, again, participate regularly in church services. They removed the portion that said it was required only of church members, which I'm not clear if they're now saying that even if you're not a member of the church, they're expecting you to attend church services. But they got rid of the language that said that that was required only of church members. And maybe that's implied in the ecclesiastical endorsement, which they now say that is you're required to maintain. So I'm not quite clear on that one. Okay, so then the provision where they said obey the law and follow campus policies. That used to be 4th on the list. Now it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th on the list. They moved it down. And then they added that you also have to obey the dress and grooming standards. So they're putting here in the honor code references to the ecclesiastical endorsement, the dress and grooming standards, to make it a part of the honor code rather than an independent set of standards. And then before, when they said that you were required to encourage others in their commitment to comply with the honor code, now they also added dress and grooming standards. Now you have to encourage others to comply with the dress and grooming standards. If you see someone with hair below their ear, a gentleman, you are now required to encourage that person to cut their hair. That's kind of interesting. So yeah, that's it. That's the changes to the honor code. Nothing too shocking or revolutionary. I do find the marijuana thing curious. It doesn't list here any exemption for medical use. Of course, I don't think they would accept a medical use of alcohol or tobacco or tea or coffee or vaping. But they don't say there's an exemption for marijuana with a doctor's recommendation. Perhaps they felt before when they said that substance abuse, some people might say, well, I'm not abusing it, I'm using it properly with, under direction of a competent medical provider. So they're making it more explicit here that you cannot use cannabis. What they continue to use the pejorative and racist origin term marijuana, which is kind of odd because that's how the word Mormon came to be, was this pejorative that other people use to kind of pick fun at the Latter-day Saints. And so now it's all about like, no, we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Don't use that term Mormon. That was made by our enemies. Well, marijuana was a term made by enemies. It's cannabis. So if we're going to use proper terms, then I think the honor code should call it cannabis rather than marijuana. Obviously, this is really nitpicky. But having been so deeply involved in getting medical cannabis legalized, what was really funny about that in Utah was when we started that campaign, everyone called it medical marijuana. All the reporters, all the media, everybody. And as we drove the campaign, it was all medical cannabis. That's all we would say. We would always talk about medical cannabis in press releases and interviews and in literature, everything. And so halfway through the campaign, polling numbers are shifting and everyone's starting to support this. And all the media is now calling it medical cannabis. It's very interesting how you can frame things like that in people's minds. So I think the church should change marijuana to cannabis, albeit being a tiny little issue. Okay, so that's it, right? Great. Yay, BYU-Idaho kids can now wear shorts and maybe flip-flops. It's unclear if they're going to try and claim that that's sloppy or overly casual. I don't know what it means to have extreme clothing. Some might say that the shirt I'm wearing right now is extreme, which I got a compliment at the airport an hour ago. This is why we can't have nice things. Some might say that, it's overly political or If someone wears a shirt that says there's only two genders, am I going to get, disciplined at BYU because somebody considers that extreme? It's good to move in a more principle-based direction, but when it's subject to the interpretation and enforcement of people who lack direction on how to apply it to specific circumstances, chances are they're going to fall into the trap of interpreting it and enforcing it based on past standards and what they've done their entire lives. So to me, this has a big question mark. I like the intent. I like the direction. I like the effort to move in a more principle-based direction. The challenge here, I think, is that it's not up to the students, right? For the strength of youth, it's like, hey, teens, here are principles to govern your life, good principles to live by. Go forth and be righteous, right? It's up to you. That's great, because you can kind of interpret it yourself, just like you can interpret for yourself what it means to be a full tithe payer or to follow the word of wisdom, right? There's some personal interpretation there that you are afforded. However, when you are a BYU student, the interpretation of these guidelines is not your own. It is not up to you. It is up to whoever happens to be employed by the Honor Code office. And again, unless they're going to clean house in there and bring in new people with new perspectives, I think we're going to struggle a little bit with this new direction. So I will be very curious in the weeks and months and years ahead to learn about what changes are being made they got rid of the one pair of earrings thing, right? Now they just say, they didn't even say anything about earrings. Now it just talks about hair. That's it. Hair should be clean, neat, modest, avoid extremes. They don't talk about tattoos. They don't talk about body piercings. So now if girls have, 3 earrings in their left ear, is someone going to freak out? Well, probably. There's probably going to be the little, cranky people who go try and report it. And hopefully the Honor Code office is going to be like, go away. We're not agreeing with that report. I question whether that's true because my own experience with the Honor Code 20 some odd, when was that? 24 years ago. My experience was that these are people who enjoy getting up in people's business and investigating. So, story for another day. But for now, I think 90% praise, 10%, come on, guys. Especially on the beards thing. So more work to be done, but really questions around what this looks like moving forward, how it's going to change, how we can empower these kids. Again, these kids are coming out of these universities and they're now adults and they're future church leaders and neighbors and ward members. How can we better encourage people to live a higher law, to focus on principles, to not get so trapped into the natural man crap, to not judge people on the outward appearance? And so in large measure, I think that this is going in the right direction. It really just boils down to implementation and what this actually looks like. So the jury's still out. I'll be watching with curiosity. As I've shared in a past musing, maybe all of this is immaterial because I'm going to be doing my best to encourage my children not to attend BYU and frankly college in general. If you didn't hear that one, you can go to sundaymusings.org and search BYU or do the drop down. BYU will show up and you can go check that out. For now, it's a wrap. Gonna go explore Chicago, try not to get murdered. Wish me luck, say a prayer. Have a good weekend.